when you come out and when you leave the room, you'll see that we just, over the last few minutes, literally shot out a boat, a drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat. And you'll be seeing that, and you'll be reading about that. It just happened moments ago, and our great general, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's been so incredible, including what took place in Iran, knocking out potential nuclear power for a long time to come. I think within a month they would have had it if we didn't do what we did. But he gave us a little bit of a briefing, and you'll see. And there's more where that came from. We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. And we just, these came out of Venezuela and coming out very heavily from Venezuela. A lot of things are coming out of Venezuela. So we took it out, and you'll get to see that after this meeting is over.
You're looking at video shared by President Trump that his administration says shows the military striking a boat from Venezuela allegedly carrying drugs. The president says 11 were killed in the attack and that no Americans were injured. Well, tensions have been rising between these countries. The United States has been increasing its presence near Venezuela to combat drug cartels. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro said the U.S. is pursuing a regime change in his country through military threats. CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson joins us now. So, Eleanor, we just saw the video that just came in. How serious is this U.S. military strike against this drug vessel departing from Venezuela?
Well, Jericho, what we know is from what the president posted and from the Pentagon, who confirmed that there was a precision strike done against a drug cartel today. President Trump posted that dramatic video showing a strike destroying a go-fast boat, which is essentially a large speedboat. According to the president, 11 members of a Venezuelan drug cartel on their way to potentially smuggle drugs towards the U.S. were killed in that strike. That marks an escalation in this administration's fight against drug cartels. Earlier this year, the administration designated several of them as foreign terrorist organizations and vowed to go after them harder. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke about that today while he was traveling. Let's listen.
The president's been very clear that he's going to use the full power of America, the full might of the United States to take on and eradicate these drug cartels, no matter where they're operating from and no matter how long they've been able to act with impunity. Those days are over.
So Secretary Rubio indicating there that these operations might continue as the military continues to surge more hardware towards the area near Venezuela.
And what intel do you have on these ships Venezuelan President Maduro alleges are targeting his country?
There are about 8 U.S. ships either near Venezuela already or on their way, which would mark, when they're all there, the largest U.S. military buildup in South America in about 3 decades. What's included in this recent ramp up is 3 different destroyers, which are all armed with about dozens of missiles, and ships as part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, which carries about 4,000 sailors and Marines. Those ships are surging to the area as the administration is putting more pressure on Maduro. Just last month, the State Department announced a $50 million reward for any information leading to the capture or arrest of Maduro. Maduro, in response, has deployed or is deploying about 15,000 troops to Venezuela's borders to respond to what he calls the greatest threat to the South American continent in about 100 years.
All right, Eleanor Watson, thank you so much for that reporting.
President Trump says 11 narco-terrorists were killed yesterday after the U.S. military struck a boat allegedly carrying drugs from Venezuela. Mr. Trump says the strike targeted members of Tren de Aragua. This is a Venezuela-based organized crime group, which the White House has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. It comes as the U.S. Navy boosted its presence in the region. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now from Washington with more on all of this. Charlie, good morning to you. What do we know about this operation and how it could impact the U.S.'s already tense relationship with Venezuela?
Yeah, well, Errol, it's definitely seen as an escalation, right? It's the first strike that we've seen from the U.S. forces there. I say U.S. forces, not necessarily the military. I'll get to that in just a second, because we haven't had a whole lot of details about exactly what took place. It happened in international waters. It was called a lethal strike. A lot of this is being driven out of the White House, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio giving us the details. As far as the Pentagon's concerned, we hope to learn more information today about which forces were involved. Now, looking at that video from my experience, it could be anything. It's shot on a few different angles. You can see it's what they refer to as a fast boat. These are the boats that kind of are seen to transport drugs from a cargo ship or a larger ship than that. They are speedy, they can get away. But what was shooting that in terms of the video may not be what shot the weapon. So you could have, it could have been a drone strike, it could have been a helicopter strike, it could have been a surface to surface. Because as you said, the buildup of naval assets there is really, we haven't seen that in like 3 decades. You've got 3 destroyers, you've got a guided missile cruiser, you've got Marines there with 3 amphibious, or about 2,200 Marines with landing craft. And what's important to note here, and this is how it was described to me yesterday in the halls of the Pentagon, when you have that much stuff, when you have that much military hardware in a relatively concentrated area, you're going to have ISR, you're going to have intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which means it's a lot easier to track a lot of that traffic going in and out of those regions for force protection and for drug interdiction.
Something we will continue to watch very closely. Charlie, thank you.
Days after a U.S. airstrike hit what President Trump calls a drug-running boat near Venezuela, Venezuela's president says he is sending 25,000 troops to combat a known drug trafficking route on the waters. Now, that first U.S. strike really ramped up tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela. In fact, Venezuela flew a military aircraft over a U.S. naval ship. President Donald Trump threatened the U.S. would shoot those jets down if that ever happened again. On Face the Nation Sunday, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee expressed concern about the president's tactics.
There are still international laws of the sea about how the process of interdicting these kind of boats. There's supposed to be a firing of a warning shot. You're supposed to try to take it peacefully. My understanding, this boat, none of those procedures are followed. And I'm going to get the full brief this week. But what I'm worried about is if we put our sailors in harm's way by violating international law, unless there is the appropriate designations, could this come back and hurt those sailors?
So for his part, Vice President J.D. Vance defended the strike on X, saying killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens is the highest and best use of our military. So let's break this down with Michael Barsecu. He's global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good to have you with us on a Monday, my friend. So you heard Senator there and also the Vice President's response. Who's right?
The senator is right. I mean, what currently the Trump White House looks at Congress as a staffing arm. They think they can bulldoze Congress, the courts, the media, for that matter. So there's a legitimate concern there. And then, when it comes to the boat, you're showing the image now. I just got off the phone with a senior Colombian diplomat. They know a thing or two about drug interdiction. And he said, this just doesn't make sense. When you're drug running, you don't fill your boats with people, because he said, Michael, I'm reminding you, it takes up space and it takes up weight. At maximum, you're going to have 2 people on there. The fear in Colombia and probably neighboring states is that these were probably migrants making a run for it. So there's quite a bit of concern in the region about that.
So it's your contacts feeling then that boat had nothing to do with drug running? Doubtful. And the other thing that doesn't add up here is where these naval assets have been deployed. We're talking about almost 7,000 men and women in uniform, because most of the Venezuela, number one, is a transit country, not a source country, mostly for drugs. And secondly, it runs most of the drugs that goes to the country up the Pacific coast and not the Atlantic. So that's caused confusion as well about the actual placement. But, I don't want to sound like a cynic or make little of this, but I suppose one thing operating in the background here is if you've just renamed the Pentagon the Department of War, maybe you have to rattle the saber a bit. But let's also remember that this could escalate. And Donald Trump is a president who was voted in on stopping wars and not starting them.
Well, you used the term escalation, so let's really piggyback off of that. It seems like one, because after the Venezuelan flyover, the U.S. then ordered 10 F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico. Is this why we're seeing Venezuela committing to their own troop buildup?
Yes, but they don't have really a lot of capacity on hand to stand up to what Mr. Trump calls the most lethal force in the world. That same Colombian diplomat I talked to said that this is all right. It is a fight against drugs. He also said that this is also a signal to Maduro that he better be careful because he is a dictator. And the Colombian said, we want someone to take care of him once and for all, because Colombia has received millions and millions of Venezuelans fleeing. And then also there's concern here, of course, about the flow of oil. Venezuela is one of 3 countries in the world with the biggest proven reserves. You probably heard about Chevron restarting some shipments to the U.S. And, I don't want to meddle too much in American politics, but one thing I do know is the one thing that matters at the end of the day, no matter what happens, is the price at the pump. So everything, a lot of what this administration does in terms of access to resources has to do with gas at the price of the pump as well.
Well, it sounds like you are getting at a counterpoint, that this has more to do with one thing than it does drug interdiction. Is that what you're saying?
Well, as I told your British partner the other day, BBC News, is there's one thing and one thing only that Mr. Trump cares about, and that's his popularity. So I think the MAGA base, this is a bit of red meat as well, that, he's showing strength and, tactical use of U.S. resources. And let's hope for now things stay on the more or less quiet level where they are, because from what I gathered from talking to other experts, this is more of a monitoring force to see where things go. They don't have really the assault force capability that would require quite the upgrade, sending a lot more assets down to that area.
Michael Bossaque, thank you so much for talking to us on a Monday. You have a good day.
Venezuela says it will increase the number of its own troops going after alleged drug traffickers. In a statement, the country's defense minister appeared to call out the U.S., saying, "No one is going to come and do the work for us. No one is going to step on this land and do what we're supposed to do." The move comes after the Trump administration struck a boat that it said was carrying drugs from Venezuela. 11 people were killed in that strike, and the Pentagon is also sending 10 fighter jets to Puerto Rico to carry out operations targeting drug cartels in the Caribbean. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now. Charlie, very good to see you, as always. How would you describe the situation right now with Venezuela, especially given this military buildup we're seeing play out in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, well, tense would be an understatement, Nancy. This is the largest U.S. military buildup in that region, genuinely for decades, and that's no small thing. But a lot of this is about signaling. Today, the U.S. military released video of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, their words, on board the USS Iwo Jima amphibious ship. That's not far from the coast of Puerto Rico, where he arrived this morning. So the Iwo Jima's got around 2,500 Marines on board. I've been on that ship. 2 other landing crafts. There are 3 other destroyers, hundreds of cruise missiles between them, another guided missile destroyer. Now, as you said, the White House anyway. Haven't got confirmation from the Pentagon, by the way, on the squadron of F-35s. Not sure if they've been deployed yet, but they're among the most advanced stealth fighter jets in the U.S. arsenal. They're fast, they're stealthy, air-to-air, air-to-surface, and you put all those things together, and this is an attacking force. This isn't a defending force. It may be a deterrent, but if you're battling, drug cartels, it is a lot. Now, President Trump has said he's not aiming for regime change, and some of this might be about force protection. This is, in terms of deploying the F-35s, it's because of those 2 F-16 fighter jets from Venezuela that came close to a U.S. destroyer. With the F-35s, Trump has options.
Still, though, it's really interesting to watch this play out, especially how it seems to have ramped up, given that I think tensions with Venezuela had largely been under the radar for many Americans for quite some time. What are the rules of engagement for striking in and around Venezuela if it came up to that?
Boy, that is an open question, especially in Venezuela? And it's a question that we've been asking a lot. We haven't really received a clear answer. And I think the reason is because there isn't a clear answer at the moment, not only about the legalities of calling in a strike on a suspected drug smuggler's boat, but what is the overall purpose of the operation? You know, is there a timeline? Is there an objective? The president, like others before him, has got quite a lot of leeway when it comes to ordering military action. If you think of countries like drone strikes in Libya or Pakistan, Syria, Afghanistan, et cetera, or even Iran, they don't necessarily need a declaration of war. But Senate Intelligence Committee is already asking, like, how did you ID the individuals on that boat? Why did those forces not follow sort of traditional interdiction, like a means of identifying the threat, warning the people on board what was happening? Then members of the Coast Guard would intercept those vessels with the Navy's help, and that's the way it's traditionally done, and maybe confiscate the drugs. We still don't know who was responsible for that strike, how it took place. Was it a drone strike? Was it a helicopter strike? Was it Special Forces? Was it the Navy? Especially as the Secretary of War says, there's more to come. And the president is saying if those F-16s get close, we will shoot them down. There's a lot of questions there, but in terms of where the United States is positioning themselves and the military equipment in that region, the fact that Venezuela deploying troops all over the place along their border and the coast, absolutely this is escalating. We're not entirely sure what the objective is, if this is a drug interdiction or if there's something more to that.
Yeah, a lot of very strong rhetoric in the meantime. Charlie D'Agata, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, I want you to take a look at this. President Trump released this video of what is apparently a second strike against a Venezuelan boat that he says was carrying drugs to the U.S. This attack just 2 weeks after the military struck another boat from Venezuela in the Caribbean. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us from Washington with the latest on this. Charlie, this is a highly unusual move for a president to make. How exactly did we get here?
I'll try to be brief, Errol. Okay, so let's take it back. First of all, drug interdiction has been going on for decades, as you and I both know. What's happened recently, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, is the president ordered around 8 battleships to that area, including 3 destroyers, Iwo Jima, which is an amphibious ship with 2,500 Marines on there, and this is the second strike. We went to the Pentagon yesterday, said, what's going on here? This is the second time there's been a strike on a drug boat, a suspected drug boat, without really showing any evidence, and you know, who's responsible? We went to the Navy and said it's not us. Now, we're assuming, and it's been reported elsewhere, that these are sort of Reaper drones. This is the first time we've seen this kind of interdiction, rather than traditionally getting onto a boat, finding out what's on there, finding out who's on there, and gathering evidence. And that's a question that Nancy Cordes put to the president yesterday.
Do you plan to provide proof that these were narco-terrorists who were on their way to the U.S.?
Well, we have proof. All you have to do is look at the cargo that was, like, it's spattered all over the ocean. Big bags of cocaine and fentanyl all over the place.
It's interesting, Charlie, because President Trump says the evidence is in the water, as you just laid out. Typically, the evidence is identified ahead of time. How is all of this then impacting Venezuela's relationship with the U.S.?
Well, Venezuela is preparing for war. The president, Nicolas Maduro, said mobilized 2,500 forces, mostly around the area around Colombia and around the coastal regions. But interestingly, they also said that part of the responsibility of those forces would be drug interdiction themselves. So they kind of are trying to show the world anyway that they're cooperating in stopping the flow of drugs out of that region.
We appreciate giving us the latest. Charlie D'Agata in our D.C. Bureau. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, breaking news. As we promise on this broadcast, when we see it, you see it. And this comes from Secretary of War, as he calls himself, on X. This is what he's saying. Earlier this morning, on President Trump's orders, I directed a lethal kinetic strike on a narco-trafficking vessel affiliated with designated terror organizations in the USS Southcom area of responsibility. He says 4 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel were killed in the strike, and no U.S. forces were harmed in the operation. He goes on to say the strike was conducted, like we've seen before, in international waters just off the coast of Venezuela, while the vessel was transporting what he says is substantial amounts of narcotics headed to America, as Mr. Hegseth says, to poison our people. He also went on to say our intelligence, without a doubt, confirmed that this vessel was trafficking narcotics. The people on board were narco-terrorists, and they were operating on a known narco-trafficking transit route. These strikes, he says, will continue until the attacks on the American people are over. Once again, the Trump administration showing video here. Let's go ahead and scroll up a little bit. This is that unclassified video that Pete Hegseth just put out. Now let's frame this and give it some context, some understanding. This strike comes less than a day after it was revealed that President Donald Trump, reports the Associated Press, declared drug cartels to be what he calls unlawful combatants and declared that the United States is now in what the U.S. and the Trump administration consider an armed conflict with them. That declaration was in a memo obtained by our peers over at the Associated Press. So those are the words. And then as we scroll up just one more time, this is the attack that Pete Hegseth said happened out there in the waters off of Venezuela. We wanted to get that on the record in that breaking news.
The government's asserting the authority to summarily kill people. It says our cartel members through military strikes against boats on the open ocean in the Caribbean. Congress has never authorized such a use of military force, and it's unclear to me how the administration has concluded that these strikes are legal. I'm concerned with what the limiting principle is, whether the government could summarily kill people. It just declares our cartel members as well as unlawful combatants inside the United States, or if they were American citizens. This isn't about defending cartels, and these aren't hypothetical questions. President Trump assembled military leaders and said they would be needed to fight the enemy from within and to train in cities in the United States that he describes as chaotic and violent. Due process is the cornerstone of our Constitution. I'm deeply concerned about the authority our president seems to be asserting to summarily kill people suspected of criminal activity outside the law. As the chief lawyer for our federal government, you have a unique responsibility to ensure maintenance of our constitutional standards. How did you conclude that these strikes on ships or boats in the open ocean are legal?
Senator Coons, I'm not going to discuss any legal advice that my department may or may not have given or issued at the direction of the president on this matter. Regarding Venezuela, what I can tell you is Maduro is a narco-terrorist, and we announced I announced $50 million reward for his capture to bring him to this country to face charges. He is currently under indictment in our country. Drugs coming from Venezuela are killing our children at record levels.
And members of this committee are as passionate as you at protecting our families and our communities from fentanyl, but we also need to protect our sailors on the high seas who are conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea from just an abject violation of international norms and standards about how we interdict ships on the high seas. We can push back on fentanyl and drug trafficking. Many of my colleagues have done so as former U.S. attorneys or prosecutors or attorneys general, but we have to do it in a way that is in keeping with the core values of our Constitution.
Meanwhile, tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela are mounting as the U.S. continues what it's calling a non-international armed conflict with drug cartels. For weeks, the U.S. Navy has been targeting Venezuelan ships it says are carrying drugs into the U.S., with the most recent strike on Saturday. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi was asked about the legality of these strikes today while testifying on Capitol Hill.
Regarding Venezuela, what I can tell you is Maduro is a narco-terrorist, and I announced $50 million reward for his capture to bring him to this country to face charges. He is currently under indictment in our country. Drugs coming from Venezuela are killing our children at record levels.
For more on this, let's bring in Vonda Felbaugh-Brown, the senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Vonda, thank you so much for being with us. You've said before that these strikes are not an effective way to prevent drug trafficking, and instead could be a way for the White House to put pressure on the Maduro regime. To what end, though?
Even the first Trump administration defined as its core policy in Latin America an effort to bring down the Maduro regime, which is a vicious authoritarian regime, no doubt about that. It didn't succeed in the first term, and while we did not see the same articulation as in the first term of trying to end the regime, we are certainly seeing a lot of indication that the Trump 2 administration is still defining that as a very crucial policy. And we have now seen both the language about Maduro as a narco-terrorist and the designation of the Tren de Aragua, a criminal group that originates out of Venezuela, as a narco-terrorist group.
Now, Bondi, the White House is calling the drug runners, quote, unlawful combatants. And the wording there is important because it's also what President George W. Bush, during his administration, used to describe al-Qaeda. So what other parallels do you see between these two conflicts? Are there parallels?
Well, the Trump administration is certainly trying to draw the parallels. Now, the big difference, of course, is that in the case of al-Qaeda, we had not just the attacks on the United States, on the U.S. homeland, but we also had a congressional law, congressional designation, permitting the targeting of al-Qaeda and its various affiliates. And as the subsequent global war on terror took place, there were many questions as to who was actually a legitimate target. We do not have any similar congressional determination, congressional legal basis for what the Trump administration is conducting and whom it is calling unlawful combatants. Certainly, this is the first time where a drug trafficking entity, a criminal entity, would be designated as a terrorist group and its members as unlawful combatants, to whom an appropriate response is immediate kill response instead of a law enforcement response. So there are massive questions about the legality of the actions, and there are also very significant questions about the efficacy. Killing low-level drug runners deprives one of the possibilities of interrogating them about who their networks are, who their political sponsors is. The Trump administration is saying that the drugs carried by them kill tens of thousands of Americans. Yet the drugs that are killing Americans are fentanyl and methamphetamine. Both are produced in Mexico from precursors originating in China and India, and they do not cross the waters of Venezuela.
Well, meanwhile, here in the U.S., President Trump said that he wants to classify certain far-left groups like Antifa as domestic terrorist groups. Could a similar strategy that we're seeing in Venezuela be used on U.S. soil?
There's again no legal basis for that whatsoever. There is also no domestic legal law that allows for the designation of groups as domestic terrorist groups. So the legal basis of that would be extremely unclear. But we have President Trump at various times calling for the death penalty for drug dealers, not simply drug traffickers. That too would be a significant change in U.S. policy. Many drug dealers are in fact drug users. So there is certainly a wide set of rhetoric coming out of the administration that would prefer highly lethal, highly militarized actions, as we are seeing domestically, but none of them stand on a legal ground.
Bondi Feldbaugh-Brown, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump says the U.S. has struck another alleged drug boat off the coast of Venezuela, killing 6 people. Trump posted this video of the strike on social media and claimed the vessel was trafficking narcotics. This is the 5th attack by the U.S. military on such boats since September. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand joins us from the White House with more on this. Good morning, Natalie. So what more do we know about this strike and how the administration is justifying the use of military force there overall?
Good morning, Errol. Well, this is a continuation of the strikes on these alleged drug vessels. The president, in this latest social media post, said that intelligence confirmed that it was trafficking narcotics and was associated with an illicit narco-terrorist network, but he did not provide more evidence or information. The president in this post also said that 6 men on board were killed, no U.S. forces harmed in the strike. The administration, since starting these strikes some weeks ago, have said that they are treating alleged drug traffickers as, quote, unlawful combatants. But as you know, Errol, Democratic lawmakers and some outside legal experts have really raised alarm about these strikes, saying that they are illegal, that you cannot take action like this against suspected drug smugglers. Typically, what would happen is these boats would be interdicted by the U.S. Coast Guard and arrests would be made on probable cause. But they're calling these kinetic strikes a violation of international law. And even some Republican lawmakers have also asked the White House for more information about their legal justification for these strikes. However, a majority of Republicans voted against last week a war powers resolution that would have prohibited strikes like this without congressional authorization. So again, there's pushback on Capitol Hill, but they did not take that step of trying to put the brakes on these strikes as they all are seeking more information, again, about the legal basis for them.
Yeah, I know we'll keep watching that closely. Natalie, thanks. The Trump administration says it has struck yet another suspected drug boat in the Caribbean. And for those of you keeping track, this marks the 7th known attack in recent weeks. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth posted this. It's a video of the strike. He says it targeted a Colombian guerrilla group that the U.S. considers a terrorist organization. All 3 people on board were killed. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand has more information on this for us, and she joins us from the White House with that. Natalie, good morning. This is just part of the reason tensions are escalating between the U.S. and Colombia. We see them sharing evidence of the strike. Has the U.S. shared evidence of why they believe these are drug-running boats?
Good morning, Errol. Well, we're not getting much more detail other than what's posted on social media on X. And that's something that Congress members are concerned about as well. They say that they're not even getting a lot of information about the intelligence behind these operations and also the legal justification for these U.S. military strikes, which have been lethal in many of these cases. Now, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, is also speaking out against the strikes and accusing the U.S. of, in one case, striking a fishing vessel last month. Now, the administration defends its actions, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, in a new post on social media, accused or alleged the boat that was struck on Friday of transporting narcotics. He also said in his post, the United States military will treat these organizations like the terrorists they are. They will be hunted and killed just like al-Qaeda, again, making the argument that they are going after what the administration has called narco-terrorists. Now, a lot of these strikes we've seen focus on alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela, but now President Trump is also speaking out against the leader of Colombia, accusing him of allowing drugs to grow under his leadership, calling him a, quote, illegal drug leader. Here's more of what he had to say. Take a listen.
They are a drug manufacturing machine, Colombia, and we're not going to be part of it. So we're going to drop all money that we're giving to them.
Now, President Petro of Colombia, pushing back, says that he's been an enemy of drug trafficking in his country. But President Trump taking additional action, saying that he will cut U.S. assistance to Colombia and also confirming that he will soon announce tariffs on Colombian imports. Again, this is a longtime U.S. ally, and experts say some of that security assistance goes to fighting the drug cartels in the country, Errol.
All right, Natalie Brand with the latest. Thank you. CBS News congressional reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now with more on those U.S. strikes on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. Caitlin, good morning. You know, I guess we've counted 7 of these strikes on alleged drug boats so far. What is the U.S. trying to achieve with Colombia? Is the administration sharing evidence that convinces it these are drug-running boats?
Yeah, Errol, this is a fascinating development. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said that this is the 7th attack that killed 3 people yesterday. And just as a reminder,
the day before, there was another attack in the Caribbean Sea that killed 2 people, left 2 survivors, and those survivors from Ecuador and Colombia were returned back to their home countries. But, Errol, this has really driven up tensions between the U.S. and the Colombian president. The Colombian president alleges that an attack on a boat last month killed a fisherman, and he's actually alleging and saying that the U.S. has committed murder. The President Trump, in response, has called the Colombian president an illegal drug leader and has vowed to cut off all financial ties to the country, is also saying that he's going to issue tariffs on Colombia soon. And, you have lawmakers on Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group, who are concerned about this leading to potentially a larger conflict in the Caribbean. Notably, you've had Senator Rand Paul, a Republican, saying that he wants to force a vote with a bipartisan group of senators to block the president from any military action against Venezuela, because remember, the president had talked about CIA action in Venezuela, to block him from any sort of action militarily unless explicitly authorized by Congress. But you may remember, Errol, that the Senate took a vote last month and it failed.
Yeah, lawmakers certainly paying attention to all of this as well. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you.
The Department of Defense, which the White House calls the Department of War, has released this video footage from Friday's deadly strike on an alleged drug-carrying vessel in the Caribbean Sea. 3 people were killed in what is the 7th known strike on a South American boat since last month. Eleanor Watson joins me now at the desk. Eleanor, always great to see you. What do we know about this? And particularly the survivors, are they in U.S. custody? And if so, under what auspices or conditions?
I'll start with what we know. As you said, this is the 7th known strike against an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean as part of the Trump administration's war against drug cartels. Secretary Hegseth, in announcing this strike, compared the cartels to al-Qaeda, saying they will be hunted down and killed just like al-Qaeda. What we've seen so far in the Caribbean is the same type of whack-a-mole strategy, or in this case, whack-a-boat strategy that proved controversial during the global war on terror when it turned out you can't kill all of the terrorists. One former military lawyer I spoke to said there are some facts on the Trump administration side to justify strikes against drug runners, including that over 80,000 Americans die each year from drug overdoses. However, many of those drugs, like fentanyl, come to the U.S. from places like China and Mexico, not through the Caribbean, which has many Democrats in Congress worried that the buildup in the region coinciding with these strikes is part of a drift towards a larger war against Venezuela. The survivors you mentioned from last Thursday's strike that killed 2 individuals and left 2 survivors. The survivors were from Colombia and Ecuador, not Venezuela. The U.S. has returned those individuals back to their home countries where it's expected they'll be prosecuted for drug trafficking. The U.S., in choosing to return them, avoided a potentially thorny issue because if it had kept them in custody, then they would have potentially been held as unlawful combatants in a place like Guantanamo Bay or prosecuted in open court here in the United States. Going to court would almost certainly require the administration to provide more information about these strikes than it has done publicly. All we've gotten from the administration so far is the videos on social media, none of the intelligence that identifies these boats as posing a direct threat to the United States.
And there are questions in Congress about the evidence for all these allegations. Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, has raised some. He did so this weekend. Let's listen.
You know, when you kill someone, you should know if you're not at war, not in a declared war, you really need to know someone's name, at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all of these people have been blown up without us knowing their name, without any evidence of a crime.
That is part of Congress's persistent questioning of this administration.
Senator Rand Paul, along with some Democratic congressmen, are planning to introduce another war powers resolution to block further action in Venezuela. A resolution last week to block these strikes failed.
And there's also a question about whether some of this is about regime change in Venezuela. We don't know, but it's certainly out there. Eleanor Watson, always a pleasure. Thanks so much.